A live look over the White House in Washington. President Trump announcing a federal takeover of the Washington, D.C. Police Department, and he says he is sending in the National Guard.
The president says it's all to fight crime throughout the district. Washington correspondent Vinay Simlot explains this move that no president has ever taken.
Crime in D.C. is ending and ending today.
Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Donald Trump declared the federal government is taking over law enforcement in the nation's capital and activating the National Guard. The Army says in a statement the National Guard will provide administrative, logistics, and physical support of law enforcement.
It's becoming a situation of complete and total lawlessness.
The president blamed crime and homelessness in D.C. Last week, he threatened to take over the city after he says a DOJ staffer was beaten during a carjacking. He wrote, "Crime in D.C. is totally out of control." Federal agents started patrolling the city over the weekend.
This is an emergency. This is a tragic emergency.
We have seen a huge decrease in crime.
But D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says after a surge of crime in 2023, city officials have worked to get it under control. The Department of Justice says violent crime is down 35% since 2023. Down 26% over last year and at the lowest levels in 30 years. The Trump administration celebrated the drop in violent crime in a press release at the end of April.
You're familiar with the rhetoric about the city and how long it goes back.
Again, that was Vinay Simlot reporting. As we mentioned, we're going to have Chief Legal Analyst Colleen Frodes weigh in on this. Let's start with the authority to do so. So he does have authority to put the National Guard there, but there is a time constraint on that.
Yeah, he has authority, and this is not like the states because D.C. is not a state, and so most of the time he would have to get the governor's approval. He doesn't need that. And I can say in that piece we talked about there being no precedent, and I agree there's no precedent for the president to do this in D.C. But it has happened, and they have been activated in other places. 68 MLK riots, 9/11 terrorist attacks, 2021 inauguration. There is precedent for the president doing this, but typically there's some things that have to occur. I mean, we talk about the constitutional authority there, Article 1, Section 8, that's there. Article 2, Section 2, that's there. That gives him this authority. So I think it's there. It's just, is it necessary at this time? And then I can say that for a couple of reasons. I know Mayor Bowser, she came here to Charlotte. I met her a number of times. Seems to be extremely level-headed. At that presser, they talked about the numbers. They talked about the Trump administration on the one hand praised that the crime was going down, but now is using crime going up as a reason. I think that's where it may be problematic in terms of do they have the authority to do this? Because typically if you're going to attempt to authorize or activate the National Guard, it's going to be to repel some type of invasion, to suppress some type of rebellion, or to execute some federal law. Well, homelessness isn't one of those types of things. And so the rationale or the reason that you're utilizing these constitutional authorities, I think that's where the disconnect is.
What's the downside to the president federalizing law enforcement in the city right now?
Well, law enforcement agency, I should say military agencies aren't trained like law enforcement agencies. And so that de-escalation portion, these military folks are trained to go in and take out folks. They're trained to go in with power to stop and to remove whatever the threat is immediately and instantly. Law enforcement officers are trained in a different capacity. And so you talk about those civil liberty concerns, you're talking about due process concerns, you're talking about the perception of the militarization of law enforcement agencies. And so I think that risk of escalation and the lack of de-escalation, and this is not a shot at at military. I come from a military family. My brother's a major in the Army. My dad's a Marine. I mean, I come from military lineage. I just know their limitations. They're not made for that, for attempting to police the police.
Different kinds of training, right?
100%.
So is there anything legally that the folks in Washington, D.C. can do to then get the National Guard removed?
I think they'll just have to work across the aisle and work with the president in this situation and attempt to try to find a way to get back some control. I mean, unlike in other places like in California where Governor Newsom is challenging and fighting those types of things that happen there in places where he needs governor's consent or at least approval to get access to the National Guard, the chain of command is different there. the chain of command for the National Guard in D.C. is they report directly to the president as opposed to that quasi-presidential governor approach that you have in the states. And so I think any request, any argument, and you didn't see that at their presser. They didn't talk about we're filing claims, and they just mentioned that this is unnecessary, unneeded. You heard hints of unlawful, but it's hard for me to find the unlawfulness in this. I just don't see the logic in it.
Can I ask this, because to Jason's point, what's the downside of it? There are parts of D.C. that are very safe. There are also parts that are historically not safe. You're talking about Brentwood, Southeast, from somebody who grew up in the D.C. area. So is there any push that the Metro Police can have? It's like, okay, if the National Guard is here, can Muriel Bowser request that Donald Trump have them go to areas where there is a high crime rate? Because when we're talking about in the National Mall, that's not where these officers need to be, but that's where they're going to be seen.
Well, that's where they can be seen, because that's that protecting federal property aspect. And so that would also give the president authorization to utilize them there. I think their ability to go other places will be just diminished, and the request can be made. I'm just not sure if the request would be honored. Right now, the president is taking this step because he believes that local elected officials aren't doing enough to stop crime.
So what does that really do for the crime rate if you're not going to go where the crime is, Khalif?
I don't think it'll go up for sure. I mean, I don't think it'll go down, I should say. I think that this right here is a response to a perceived increase in crime where the statistics don't support the increase and they support a decrease. And so now if you add individuals there, especially militarizing locations where crime isn't, prevalent, it doesn't do anything but have a strong show of force and then creates a larger divide between that federal and local. And I know we got the wrap, but I'll say this. The party that is normally saying that big government doesn't work, it is ironic that they're saying now that the federal government will now take on a local, state, I should say, or district issue, which is kind of weird in this scenario.
All right, Khalif, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.